Okay, so for this you're going to need a sharpener, rubber and a pencil, and I'm just going to start out by sketching the circle to make a sphere. So I'm actually using my shoulder joint and not my wrist, so actually really move and kind of practice in the air first before you put it down on paper. Now I'm using my wrist movement just to actually get, kind of figure out from those lots of lines that I've just drawn which ones are actually correct and which ones I want to keep. So I'm just kind of lightly sketching over. I've still got lots of lines, and don't worry about this, but make sure you draw lightly so that you can actually rub it out later. And now I'm going to draw a light source, and of course you could have light coming from different angles, but I suggest you just try with the light source that I've done, and then maybe later on experiment with different light sources. And so I'm starting to shade from the opposite end of the sphere to where the light is. This is the direction that you want to shade in. So see that my lines aren't just going straight up, they're going kind of towards that point, and even around the back there's still some shadow because the light is going on kind of not quite the corner but on the kind of top right area. And that's an example. If you would have the light going directly at the sphere, then you would shade around the sphere completely and gradually blend it into the middle. So it does depend where the light is. So when I'm shading here, I'm actually shading towards that light. So like the images on the right that I've just drawn, I am shading in that direction as much as possible. Sometimes to speed things up, you might kind of cross-hatch, so you might shade in a different direction like I am here, or even use circular motions. So here is an example where I could use, straight lines to build up that shade and blend, but you could also use kind of more circular motions. And of course, if you're going to shade lightly, then you need to hold your pencil up there, and it's going to apply less pressure. So when it does come to blending those really, really light areas, make sure you're thinking about where you're holding your pencil. And if you're doing a darker area, then you want to hold it lower down so that you're really putting more pressure on. But I would save this till later. I wouldn't do this too soon, because just in case you wanted to rub something out or change something. So I'm just using circular motions to blend here. So now I'm just going to use my rubber to kind of get that circular shape that I didn't quite manage to get earlier because I was doing a lot of sketching, and just rubbing out those little bits of rubber marks. Try and blow them out if you can rather than using your finger, but sometimes it doesn't work, so just blow on it to get it away. And so here I'm just drawing the shadow, and you've got to kind of think about where that light would be hitting the ball. And obviously the best thing to do would be to actually look at something, but you know, this is kind of how you would do it from this angle anyway, but I would suggest that you maybe have a practice by looking at objects and playing around with the light source to see where how the shadow changes. And again, even with the shadow, you've still got blending from dark to light. So what area of the shadow would get absolutely no light whatsoever, and then it would probably fade out because you're of course going to have light hitting from different angles. And now I'm just going to use the rubber because even though it's in a lot of shadow, you'd still get light bouncing up from the surface. So quite often you'll see just that little bit of a highlight around there, not super light, but compared to the dark edge that you've got, it should just give a little bit of a highlight and make it look a little bit more 3D. And of course you can use your rubber to highlight, so use it really like it's a white pencil. I haven't really used it to rub anything out. I'm not kind of rubbing out every single bit of work I've just done. I'm just using it like that. So now I'm doing the cylinder. So I'm starting with an oval and then completely vertical lines going straight down. And then whatever that curve is, you kind of almost want to draw almost like a parallel sort of curve. So it's the same curve. So if you were looking straight down at, let's say, a can or a bottle top, for example, it will look like a circle, but the more and more you change your angle, the flatter it will look, until if you were looking at a cylinder completely at eye level, it would look just like a rectangle. So that's looking straight down at it, and then as you go down the line or up the line, you're looking from completely at an eye level. So that's your basic shape. You could also do it like this by doing an oval and then another oval, but it's got to be the same size, and then joining up those edges. But do remember to rub out that line there. So I'm just going to change up the light source so you can see how it might vary if it's the light's coming from a different angle. And again, I don't want to have it completely on the edge. I want it to be slightly from the left towards me. And so I'm going to start again by shading in the area where the light is least likely to be touching the object. As the light is coming from that top left corner, it's probably going to be darker bottom right, so that's why I kind of made that extra bit shaded in there. And as you can see, I'm shading in the direction of that curve, so that kind of parallel to that curve. I'm not just using straight lines. And of course here I'm also doing a little bit of cross-hatching just to speed things up, and I also don't want to go over the lines too much, but I can always rub that out and neaten that up in the end anyway, so don't worry if you do go over the lines a little bit. And here I'm just starting to neaten up that edge a little bit because I went slightly out with when I first drew my oval. I did, I've got a few different lines there, so I'm just kind of figuring out exactly where, which line I want, but I don't want to go over it too dark because it's not going to get that much light. That it's not going to be in that much shadow. And here I'm just blending out that line. So if you do any lines with this, just to kind of figure out where you are, you do need to make sure you really, really blend that out and don't do a dark line. It does not need to be dark. And again, just using a rubber just to highlight and to neaten up any edges. And here I haven't quite used the biggest range of tones yet, so I'm just going in with my pencil to make those darker areas. If you imagine that there's a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lightest and 10 being the darkest you can possibly get, then I'm kind of trying to create that 10, 9 and 8 kind of numbers, tones. That will help your work look even more 3D, the more contrast you have from dark to light. Rather than just having very pale drawings or very dark drawings, you kind of want a mixture of everything. So here I'm going to start the shadow, and I'm kind of looking at, of course this is a taller object, and you've got to think about where that base would be, so it's not going to end on the corner where I've drawn, it's going to come a little bit further away from that, where the kind of top of the oval is. So I'm just lightly sketching first where that shadow is. Of course the best way for you to do this and test the light source is to get something like a can and put it near a window, and or maybe you've got a lamp or something, and to play around with where that light comes from, where that shadow is. And again, it's going to be shaded from dark to light, so you're going to have dark areas where there's no light, and then it's going to get lighter and lighter as it fades out. Unless the light was particularly strong, then you'd have a little bit of a stronger shadow. And of course I'm just kind of making up some light here, and I don't want it to be too harsh. And like I did with the sphere, I'm just going to use my rubber just to catch some light where there might have been some bouncing off of the surface onto the object. So now I'm going to show you how to draw a cube. And you want to start by drawing a square. Try and make sure the sides are even. Of course, if you want to be very precise with this, you could use a ruler, but it's always a good idea to be able to sketch it out without having a ruler for later on, because you might have to draw a cube sometimes with objects that aren't perfectly square anyway. So here's a way that a lot of people like to do it. Draw 2 squares overlapped and then join up the corners. That's a really handy tip. If you're really struggling with it, try doing it that way. But again, you do need to remember to use a rubber just to rub out those inside lines that you wouldn't actually see unless it was a see-through object. These lines must be parallel. This is one reason why I don't always like that method, because you would have to draw the squares exactly the same, and that can be a little bit tricky unless you're using a ruler and making sure it's exact. So I like to do it like this. So draw a square and draw your 3 parallel lines. They need to be the same length. Obviously I'm kind of guessing for now. So those sides need to be also parallel. So you have these 3 lines parallel, and those are all vertical, so this should be easier to figure out. And then you have your 3 horizontal lines, like this here. So where some people go wrong is they'll do the square and then they'll draw 3 lines, but they will not be parallel, and then they'll just join them up and it will look really dodgy. Or they'll draw a square and then 3 parallel lines, but the parallel lines will be at different lengths, so that when people then go and join them up like this, they end up again looking wonky. So maybe if yours are looking a little bit wonky still, then have a look at that and see whether that is what you're doing, and go just recap on the other tips. Make sure that is a vertical and a horizontal line. the other three should be parallel at a diagonal angle, whichever angle you've decided, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to go in with that method which I prefer, but there's not particularly a right or a wrong way to do it out of those two. Making sure those are the same length as much as possible, but again, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to make sure that that line is parallel. I can always add up some more length on any of the corners that I've just done. So I'm going to choose a light source. I'll have it coming from that angle. And then the shading is a little bit easier on a cube because you don't have to blend, you just need to have 3 different tones. So if you find it hard to blend and you find it hard to blend with a pencil and show a range of tones, and this is good because you just need to have the 3 tones. So I'm going to have my darkest tone here, and you can kind of make it how dark you like it really. You could do it really, really, really dark, like a 9 or a 10 in how dark you want it. And then this is going to be my mid-tone. So I'm kind of cross-hatching for this, or just hatching at the moment, and then I'm going to turn it around the other way. I don't want to go over the line too much, that's why I've left that little edge there, and then I'll go over it here and just come across like that. And it does take a lot of building up of layers, because if you try and rush it and you use your pencil more firmly, then you're going to see all these lines and it's not going to look great. I'm also doing circular motions like I have been doing for each of them when I want to try and blend everything in, blend those lines in so it's not looking too liney. In a moment my camera's going to run out while I'm doing the shading, but I'll put a picture in the thumbnail and so you can see what to do. I didn't use a rubber to highlight at the end because I didn't feel I needed to, but go back and check out the cylinder and how to shade the shadow on that.